Hello and welcome to Golden Hour Knitwear. My name is Cameron and today I thought it'd be fun to share with you the things that I learned through releasing my first pattern. I recently released my first knitting pattern and I learned a lot. I'll just put it at that. There was so many things that came up through that I learned while I was designing it and knitting it and putting it through testing and grading it and, well, grading before testing, obviously, and making all the pattern fixes, writing up the pattern, going through all the drafts of the pattern, and then finally releasing it. I've also noticed that there's not a whole lot of info on what it's like to release a pattern. At least not that I could find anyways. There's obviously some information out there, but not a whole lot. So I figured it'd be fun to share, especially from like my very first experience doing it. Obviously, I'm not at all an expert at this. This is I've only done this once and I hope to do it a lot more times and I hope to learn from the process. So I think it's good for me as well as everybody else to kind of share the things that I've learned and reflect on them, I guess. I have 5 main points that I want to hit today, but within those 5 points, there's also many little points and I'll kind of dive into those as we get there. I probably learned more than I know I learned, I guess, if that makes sense. But these 5 main points are the biggest ones, the ones that I've been thinking a lot about lately and that I would like to share today. So in no particular order, here they are. And I'll share more detail about each of these in a second, but I'm going to list all 5 of them. Number 1 is that writing up a pattern and grading it and putting it through testing and measuring all parts of my sweater and taking the gauge in all parts of my sweater taught me a lot. Like, taught me so much about my knitting and how I can improve upon my knitting and how I can improve my understanding of knitting and all the technicalities of knitting. Number 2, I learned way more about the math behind making a good fitting sweater. And now that I know so much more about the math, I would change the way I go about self-drafting a pattern in the future. Number 3, I learned so much more about myself and what I'm able to take on as a knitter and a business owner within Golden Hour Knitwear and a yarn dyer and a pattern creator, all these different things, and what I need to do in order to make this a successful and efficient business for myself without getting burnt out. Number 4, I learned so much about, and obviously I have so much more to learn, but I learned a ton about creating a size-inclusive piece of garment, a size-inclusive sweater. I learned a ton about fit adjustments and about working with other people in order to make size-inclusive things come to life, and I learned a lot about what it takes to put out a size-inclusive design. And number 5, I think this is probably the biggest one, maybe. I learned how much work actually goes into creating a decent knitting pattern. Again, there's way more than just those 5 topics to talk about, but those are the ones I'm going to talk about today. So without really anything else, let's just dive in and talk about each of those things in a little bit more depth. Okay, number 1. So when it came down to it and I was really measuring my garment and really measuring my gauge and I was really writing down every single step of my pattern and explaining it to another person and putting it on paper, I realized how technical knitting can be and how much I can improve. If you have never taken one of your finished sweaters and or any garment and measured your gauge in multiple different places and measured the width and the circumference and just all of the different measurements of all the different places of your sweater or other garment, then, well, you need to. Because there's so much that it can teach you about your knitting. This pattern in particular was a huge eye-opener for me to gauge. I recognized that my purling rows are tighter than my knit rows. So when I'm knitting flat, my row gauge changes compared to when I'm knitting in the round. So that was interesting for me to learn about myself. I also got to really understand what happens to my own gauge when I introduce color work into my knitting. It's a huge eye-opener. And I'm just gonna challenge you. I'm gonna challenge you to do it, okay? Go get one of your finished sweaters that you finished more recently and or just any finished knitting thing that you finished more recently, and go take the gauge of it in multiple different places. Check the yoke, check the body, check the sleeves, check just everywhere that you had some kind of change in technique, whether you were knitting flat or in the round, or you had German short rows, or you had color work, or you had a different texture going on. Go take the gauge in each of those sections on the thing that you finished, and then measure all of the different areas of that item and compare it to what it says in the pattern that you should have gotten. And I think if we all did this a little bit more regularly, I think we would all recognize the importance of gauge and how massively even half a stitch or one stitch off of gauge can really change the fit of our sweaters. I learned this not only through my own experience of knitting the sweater and grading it, but also through watching my testers knit up the sweater as well. And because of that, I've also learned how to better adjust sweaters to fit the way I want them more. So if I'm knitting a sweater by another designer and I go to try it on and I don't like the fit of the yoke, because I have a better idea of gauge and how to use my gauge to make things fit the way I want them to, I can change up and kind of mess around with the sizing of different patterns a little bit easier. Before, that was such a scary thing for me. Before I graded for however many sizes, 9 sizes, before I graded this pattern for 9 different sizes, ranging from 30 to 60 inches of actual bust size, I think, off the top of my head. Anyways, it's just amazing how much more comfortable I now am to mess around with stitch counts on a pattern, or to mess around with lengths, and to just do what I want to make it fit me a little bit better the way I know I like my clothes to fit. So for you, if you've never released a pattern before, if you've never graded anything before, if you've never messed around with the sizing on your sweaters or your other knitted garments before, I really encourage you to learn a little bit more about gauge and how gauge affects sizing and how we use gauge to get different sizes of garments and knitted objects. I encourage you to learn more about that so that you feel more comfortable kind of modifying and tweaking your own sweaters to fit you even better. For example, I'm a shorty. I learned that my arms are probably 2 inches shorter than like the average arm, just because I'm short. Because I'm short, my arms are short, right? And because of that, sometimes when I'm knitting a sweater, I have to kind of adjust the sleeve decrease rate sometimes, right? And because I've now graded it for 9 different sizes, I now better know how to think ahead of time, look at the length of the sleeve, how long I want it to be, how many rows that's going to be, and how many times I need to decrease to get to the cuff width I want, right? All those different things. So knowing more about gauge and sizing and grading and all those things, and applying it to your body shape and your type and everything can really help you come up with ways to make patterns fit you the way you want them to. I also noticed, and this one's kind of silly, but I also noticed that some of us work a make one right purl, inserting the left hand needle through the back of the stitch, and some of us work it putting the left hand needle through the front of the stitch. It just depends on whether we consider it right leaning from the right side of the fabric or from the left side, the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm not going to dive into that too much today, but I just recognize that there's differences in the way some of us do things, and I never paid that close attention to patterns because I just know how to make a right leaning increase and a left leaning increase depending on which side of the fabric I'm working on. But it was just interesting to notice the way we all just do things kind of differently. Not that we do them differently, we just call things differently sometimes. And it threw me for a huge loop there for a second, but it really forced me to like really understand knitting techniques and knitting terminology and all sorts of things. Okay, number 2. So through the whole grading process of the sunset sweater, I realized all the different places where we do math. It's not just at the yoke, it's not just at the increases for the sleeves or for the shoulder shaping, depending on what construction you're doing. It's not just your bust width, it's at the neck, it's at the arms, it's at the cuffs, it's at the bicep width, it's at the what else is there? just so many different places where we do math. And I didn't realize that before I started. I just kind of started knitting it according to how I know I like my sweaters to fit me and the sizes that I like them to be and the vision that I had for the sweater to be boxy and oversized. And I tried it on multiple times as I went to make sure that it was fitting me the way I wanted to. But now that I know how to grade, I now know that next time I want to self-draft patterns, or in the times since that I have started self-drafting patterns or sweaters, that I know exactly what I want to do in order to get the fit that I want. I now refer to my size chart a whole lot more often, and I take a look at my size, like my average measurements for my 32-inch bust, and I look at the bicep width, and I think, okay, if that's my bicep width, how many inches of positive ease do I want for my sleeve starting at the bicep, and how many inches of positive ease do I want for my wrist, and then how do I need to decrease throughout that? And if I want my bicep to have that much positive ease, how many inches is that, and how deep do I want my armhole opening to be to have that exact amount of positive ease? I also now know a whole lot more about shaping for like for drop shoulders, for example, and I now know how to better kind of work them to get the amount of drop that I want so that it's not, you know, sitting here, and so that it's not sitting in my elbow. I now know how to kind of work everything a little bit better. So I learned, I guess, the basic takeaway from this step is that anytime I'm self-drafting a sweater or any other type of garment, I want to do the math first. I want to sit down. It's going to take a lot less ripping out because of that, but I want to sit down. I want to write out charts if there's, you know, lace or cables or just some other kind of texture. I want to consider all the numbers, consider all the measurements that I want, take the measurements of other garments that I really love and look at the positive ease and negative ease and kind of knit it up in my head and do the math before I start. Okay, number 3. This one is more for myself, but it's also kind of a PSA. Like, don't learn for yourself, learn from my mistakes, I guess. And not that I would necessarily call them mistakes. I learned so much through this experience. And it's kind of bringing me into point 5, I guess. Maybe I should have swapped them. But there's so much that goes into, 1, coming up with a pattern and the design that you want it to be. 2, doing the math to make sure that it fits you correctly. 3, knitting it up and then probably frogging it multiple times to make sure that it's the way you want it to be. 2, completely knitting an adult size sweater, right? Or whatever it is that you're designing. 2, writing down the pattern and hoping that your notes work out correctly. To grading the pattern if there's multiple sizes, if you're not just doing like a scarf or something. To putting out a test call and making all the content for YouTube and Instagram around it. To organizing the test call, choosing the testers, you know, just all of the things. There's so much that goes into creating a pattern and, you know, with multiple sizes and making it fit well for everybody and doing it the right way, right? And by right way, I mean testing and anyways. So there's so much that goes into creating a pattern, right? With multiple sizes. On top of that, I offered kits for my testers. I dyed the yarn for the sunset sweater, and that was a lot of fun for me to come up with a lot of different color palettes for the sunset sweater and then to offer them to my testers at a discounted price to help them with yarn costs and stuff like that and to thank them for testing for me. And then it was really fun to see them knit it up and enjoy the yarn and everything. And then it was a lot of fun to offer kits when the pattern launched as well. And to be able to offer the same exact colors and yarn that I used in my sweater for other people so that they can achieve the same thing if they wanted to. So while that was a lot of fun, that was a lot of work. Dyeing up kits for my testers was so much work. Let's see, that was right before the holidays. And so it was right before the holidays. And so there was the excitement of preparing for the holidays and all the traveling and family time and everything like that. And the deadline of getting kits dyed up ASAP for my testers so that they could have plenty of time to knit the sweater during the test knit. I've never had to dye that much yarn before. It's just me. It's just me ordering the yarn, prepping the yarn, dyeing the yarn, rinsing the yarn, skein, like twisting the yarn into a skein, labeling it, packaging it, and sending it out. It's just me. And where I had almost 200 skeins to dye up, and I tried to get it done within a week or two so that they would all have their kits ready, it was a lot of work. I also have a little kiddo at home, and it just wasn't very feasible for me, especially with the holidays right afterwards. I got extremely burnt out. At that point of life, I also had like personal family stuff going on as well, and it was just, I was exhausted and I got pretty burnt out. It was a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, and I'm very glad that I did it and I was able to offer that for my testers, and I want to do that again in the future, but on a smaller scale. I don't know exactly how to facilitate that, I guess, to make sure that my workload is a little bit less in the future, whether I dye up kits ahead of time or I don't do as big of a discount, or if I only offer 10 kits instead of 20 kits, or I, you know, and open it up to the plus size testers first or something like that. But biggest takeaway for that is that I now know my limits, I guess. And I know what I can take. I know what I'm willing to take. Those are two different things. What I can take and what I'm willing to take. And I now know that I like dyeing yarn. I like dyeing yarn for others and selling hand-dyed yarn and all that fun stuff. But at least at this point in my life, where I have a little 2-year-old, a sassy little 2-year-old running around screaming no at me all the time, I need to preserve my own creative time and limit what I can do for others. So that got me thinking about how I want to shape my business, how I want to shape Golden Hour Knitwear. And I originally thought that I was going to do collections all the time and come up with a bunch of different colors and dye up samples of them, take photos of them, have pre-orders, right? Your typical hand-dyed yarn collection. And I've done one. I was going to also do one right when I put out the test call for the sunset sweater. That did not happen because I was dyeing up 200 skeins for my testers, and it was just way too much for me to do a collection and do that many skeins for my testers all at the same time, as well as run the test knit and take care of my family and keep time for myself for knitting and creative time and stuff like that. I almost only ever take time to knit and dye yarn and fulfill orders and ship and package and film and edit and write up patterns and all of the things that I do for Golden Hour Knitwear and my creative time. I almost only ever do that when my daughter is sleeping. So that's 2 hours when she's napping in the day, if I'm lucky. And then when she goes to bed at 7 o'clock at night. So 7, 8, 9, 10 if I stay up to 10. 3 hours if I stay up to 11, that's 4 hours. So 5 to 6 hours a day to get everything done and still have time for myself. It's just not feasible. I can't design and write up patterns and have kits for the patterns and run test knits and knit whatever I want as well from other designers and do collections and stuff like that. So I've decided that for me, my business doesn't have collections. I don't think in the future, I mean, maybe when my kiddo is older and in school someday, maybe I will. But for right now, it's just not feasible for me. So I've decided that I'm not doing collections anymore. And unless I have extra time and energy and I'm like, let's do it. Like if I don't have any designs or something like that, or life isn't very crazy. But I've had a lot of fun with just doing kits and only having, 4 color options on one base rather than having a whole bunch of different colors on a whole bunch of different bases. That's just a lot for me to handle with my little kiddo and only having few hours in the day to myself and for my business. It's more feasible time-wise, more feasible financially, more feasible, just all of the different things, right? So going through the process taught me what I can do and what I'm willing to do and helped me shape my business around that. So if you're hoping to, start your own hand-dyed yarn company or to start releasing patterns, or if you already are doing those things and you're wanting to take it to the next level, obviously I don't have a whole lot of experience, but my biggest advice is to try new things, put yourself out there. And it's okay to get yourself in those kind of tougher situations where you have a lot on your plate, but then to take a step back and realize and to learn from the experience and learn whether you liked that or not and adjust from there. if you didn't like the experience, if you're like, that's too much for me, or you just did not enjoy the experience, learn from it and say, okay, how can I change for the future? How can I mold my business around what I like to do and what I want to do, and move forward from there? Because this is knitting. Like, it's our hobby to knit and be creative and come up with fun colors and dye yarn, right? All of these things, it's our hobby. And, you know, I said it in my very first episode. If you're new here, you may not have heard it, but golden hour knitwear, for me, I love golden hour. The golden hour is when the sun is setting and everything in the world is kind of glowing, right? That time is just, it brings back so many fun and nostalgic feelings for me, and automatically that time of day is always just so special and magical. Knitting is the same way for me. And if I want to turn it into a business and sell hand-dyed yarn or release, you know, knitting patterns, then I have to protect that. I can't, you know, let my content creation and my pattern creating and my yarn dyeing and selling and stuff like that, I can't let that become not fun for me. So through this process, I've really learned how to take a look at what's going on, listen to my feelings and listen to my body, and to really just do what works for me and not care whether it's the norm or not. You know, not every person who releases patterns also offers kits that they dye themselves. Not everybody who hand dyes yarn only does kits for designs. I mean, a lot of the time there's collections, right? A lot of the time they do pre-orders and collections, or they do small shop updates or something like that. That doesn't work for me. I don't love that. It is fun, I just don't love it. For some reason, it just like in my brain. But what I do love is coming up with colors, a bunch of different color options for something that I'm knitting and that I love, and to curate kits around them and then to offer them to people and, you know, just have fun matching and knitting the same colored things together. I think that's a really important lesson in anything that you do, right? Is to always just listen to yourself and think about, is this working? Do I like this? If not, how do I fix it? Okay, number 4, I learned a lot about size inclusivity. There's obviously always something to improve with everywhere, right? Like, I will always be modifying and updating the way I grade for plus size bodies, especially as I'm, you know, learning more fit adjustment tips like bust adjustments and all sorts of things like that. But the biggest thing that I learned about size inclusivity and creating a size inclusive pattern is that the knitting community is amazing. I mean, I already knew this, but when I first set out to write up this pattern and grade it to multiple sizes, I knew I wanted it to be size inclusive, just because the thought of putting something out there and getting people excited about it, but then them realizing that they can't knit it because I didn't make it available to them, that makes me sad. And I don't ever want to do that to anybody. And so I knew that I wanted it to be size inclusive, but it scared me because I have always watched people talk about or heard people talk about how, yes, there's 9 pad sizes and yes, it goes up to a 60-inch bust, but it doesn't fit correctly. And so it just doesn't work. So I was terrified, especially because I had never graded anything before. I didn't have the budget to have somebody grade it for me. That gets really expensive. And I was just terrified that I wasn't going to create something that was going to be beneficial for plus size people and that I was going to make them feel left out or not included or something. I didn't want anybody to feel like they weren't listened to or cared about. So as I moved forward and I brought testers in and I chose testers and we were working through the pattern and working through the sizing and everything like that, they got further in the pattern and people are so nice. That's all I have to say. People are so nice. And if you really show that you care and you want to work with people and that you want to help them make it work for them, they're willing to work with you. And if you have that open mindset and open heart and you're willing to talk through things and willing to change and, you know, and you really, you know, are adamant about that and you let everybody know that you want this to work for them and you want to make a garment that fits everybody really well, then everybody's going to work with you. I mean, obviously there's a few people who are not going to be very helpful, but the vast majority of people are going to be extremely helpful and open and willing to help you and teach you what they know, and it's amazing. The fiber arts community in general, I think we are very caring people. And if you haven't seen that, just go hop on Instagram, follow a whole bunch of fiber artists, a bunch of hand-dyed yarn companies and knitters and podcasters, and you'll very quickly see that we all bond together, we all help each other out, we all help support each other, and really, we just support each other so well. And so I think if you're one who's about to create a design, or if you've been releasing patterns for a while, but they haven't been size inclusive and you want to be size inclusive, you want to broaden your range of sizes, but you're scared to do that, you don't have to be, because the knitting world is so kind. The vast majority of the people in the knitting world are so kind, and they're so willing to jump in there and help you. A lot of my testers were so kind, and I thanked them very much for teaching me and helping me. They usually said something along the lines of, no problem at all. I'm glad I can help because I want to help teach others how to improve, and I want to help others improve so that the knitting world can be more inclusive, so that we can all learn together and just grow as a knitting community. And that's like the best. That's so beautiful to me. Like, it's amazing how supportive we all are of each other and how much care that we give each other, and it's amazing. So yes, it takes a lot of thinking and a lot of research and care and math and, experience and research, all of those things. It takes a lot of everything to grade patterns to fit everybody correctly. But at the same time, the knitting community is so loving and so helpful. And, it's easy to find somebody who's more than willing to help you along the way if you need it. That's not to say that you should take advantage of people who are willing to help, improve your grading or help make things size inclusive, right? Don't take advantage of people in a negative way. But I think it goes a long way to know that there are so many people who are willing to just work together to improve the fiber community and improve the knitting community and size inclusivity, and just help each other broaden our size ranges and broaden our minds about how to make things fit everybody well. We can't improve size ranges and fit for plus size knitters without working together and without supporting each other. So that's amazing. And I'm really, really glad that I experienced that and met so many wonderful people through the experience and learned from so many wonderful people. And number 5, that's a big one. Basically, there's so much work that goes into a pattern, and we're gonna jump into the depths of the pricing of patterns and what a knitwear designer makes. I'm not gonna share a whole bunch of numbers because I haven't looked too much at the numbers for the Sunset Sweater release yet. While the Sunset Sweater was in testing, quite a few other designers started opening up and talking a little bit more about how within this industry, knitting patterns are, say, for a sweater, maybe $6 to $12 US dollars. Now, in the sewing world, in the sewing industry, patterns are, $15 to $25 for, a top, a t-shirt or a jacket or, a dress pattern or something like that. Now, I'm not a sewer. I know how to sew, and I can sew things pretty well, and I can follow a pattern and, make a t-shirt or something. I've been sewing longer than I'm knitting, but I don't sew very often at all. So I might be slightly biased towards knitting, but it takes a long time, a very long time, to sew a sweater. Hours and hours and hours and hours. It also takes a long time to knit or to sew a t-shirt. I mean, a basic t-shirt, I would say probably doesn't take as much time to sew as it does to knit a basic t-shirt, especially if it's like fingering weight or DK weight at a smaller gauge. So, one, the fact that it takes forever, a very long time to knit a sweater, especially for the larger sizes. And 2, it costs a ton of money to knit something out of quality wool. And if you're designing sweaters, you're usually at a place where you recognize quality materials and you want to work with quality materials. That usually costs more, right? Quality wool is expensive. So the time and the resources and the finances that it takes to just only knit the pattern, only come up with it, right? Not only does it take a long time to knit a sweater, but to knit it for the very first time from scratch, from your brain only, takes even more time, because I guarantee you're probably going to frog at least one time, and probably a significant, amount of area just to make sure it fits well. Unless it's, a simple drop shoulder or a raglan design or something like that, and you've knit that construction before, and I mean, that might be a little bit easier to knit and there's going to be less frogging. But if you're doing something with a lot of texture or color work or interesting construction or something like that, you're probably going to frog. You're probably going to frog a lot. And it's just going to be expected. So that sweater is going to take extra long to knit. It takes a lot of time to knit up. It takes a lot of money to knit up. It takes a lot of time to write up a pattern. It takes a lot of time to grade and to learn how to grade. Or it takes a lot of money. It's quite expensive to hire somebody to grade your pattern for you. And then it's quite expensive to have somebody tech edit your pattern for you. And then a long time while that pattern is in testing. It takes a lot of work to organize a test group. It takes a lot of marketing. It takes a lot of social media work. It takes a lot of work to, not only organize the test knit, but to run it and to work with the test knitters, communicate with them on a daily basis, usually, to help them through any problems that come up, and to just communicate with them in any way, right? It's just a lot of work to release a pattern, and then to go through all of the different edits of the pattern, and then to finally release it and market it. Again, all of the social media work is a lot of time as well. Plus, a lot of designers knit more than one sample. They knit the design one time, and then usually they knit it, not usually, but a lot of the time, a lot of designers knit it a second time, one to just solidify sizes in fit in a few different places if something was a little bit off. They don't want to frog the entire sweater, they just want to start fresh, and try something new. Or they just knit it again with the testers to have it in a different color, to showcase the different colors, or so that they can film a tutorial of the patterns to post on YouTube to increase the success rate of anybody purchasing the pattern. That's a lot of work. And filming a tutorial for your pattern is a lot of work. There's hours of film on this very camera that I need to edit and put together for a tutorial for the sunset sweater. It takes a lot more time than I expected it would. Oh, and then taking photos of finished objects so that you can post it with the pattern. Sometimes, people pay for professional photos of their pattern, of their sweater, and that can rack up the price too. So all of those things combined, it's a lot of time and a lot of money to produce a nice pattern. Obviously, you can do it a little bit more budget friendly. You can do it a little less budget friendly, right? But all in all, it's a lot of time and resources to come up with a sweater pattern or any kind of knitting pattern. And then to turn around and sell it for $6 to $12. Say you only sell 10 patterns. You're not breaking even. Say you sell 20 patterns. 20 patterns, let's just say 10, 20 times 10, $200. You still aren't breaking even, especially if you paid for a grader or a tech editor. And if you knit 2 samples, didn't pay for a grader or tech editor, you're probably still not breaking even. Especially if you're trying to pay for the hours and hours that you spent in writing the pattern and knitting the design. So it can take, I've found YouTube videos of other designers, and I'll try to link them below, but YouTube videos of other designers talking about how it took years for them to break even on even one design. And that's crazy, right? I didn't see those until partway through the test period of the sunset sweater. And I was like, whoa, I'm just not going to expect to make anything from this. I'm just going to expect that I sell like 10 patterns, make maybe $100. Yay, great. Luckily, the sunset sweater did extremely well, especially for my first pattern, and I'm very lucky for that. I think it did far better than I ever could have dreamed or anticipated. But I also think it's a bit of an outlier. It's not the typical sweater that, that usually comes out every day. Not to say, that might sound a little big-headed, but there's just not a lot of sweaters out there on the market like that with, drop shoulder, color work on the body rather than on the yoke. And, for colors, it's more geometric color work rather than traditional like floral color work, right? Plus being size inclusive. So I think, I'm not expecting the same success for the rest of my sweater designs as I did for the sunset sweater. So having said that, I don't really know what to expect for the future. If all of the designs that I ever launch do as well as the sunset sweater did, and if I could do that every other month, I'd be very happy. But I know for a lot of designers, they can't live off of what they make from releasing patterns. And again, I'm not just releasing the pattern, I also released kits for the sunset sweater. So there's been a lot of talk, especially on Instagram lately, on pricing in patterns and what we should be pricing knitwear patterns. I know when I first started knitting, and anytime I saw a sweater pattern that was $9, $10 or more, I'd be like, holy dang, I'm not spending that much money on a pattern. That's too much money for a pattern. Like $5. Give me the pattern for $5 and I'm happy, right? But now that I've actually put the time and energy into creating a pattern and releasing it and getting it tested and creating a tutorial for it and all of the different things, I will happily spend $12 on a pattern. Like that, I mean, that's the higher range of patterns these days, I think. The average range that I've seen is, you know, $8, $7, $6, even $6 to $12 for a pattern. There's some below that, there's some above that. But even with that, I would happily pay $12 to support a designer for a pattern, for a well-written, well-designed pattern, right? Even if that pattern does not have a tutorial, even if I only can see one color, there's not multiple samples, right? I would happily support a designer for $12. So that's very, very vastly changed my perspective on the pricing of patterns and on just what it is like to release a pattern and the time and energy and resources that it takes to release a pattern. I'm grateful for all of the creative people out there still releasing patterns, even if they're not making as much money as they deserve off of it. Though I do wish the industry standard, I guess, would raise a little bit. Not just for my sake. I'm not just saying this for myself, because I mean, me and my family, we don't necessarily need the extra money, but for others, this is what they do for a living. And, you know, unless you're Petite Knit or My Favorite Things Knitwear or, you know, one of the big designers out there, you can't afford to just charge $4 a pattern and sell 20 of them and call it a day, right? Like that's just not feasible. And so it just really opened my eyes, and I'm glad that I learned that and that I can now appreciate patterns for what they're worth. And I feel much better about supporting designers, you know, whatever they decide to price their patterns at. Okay, I think that's it. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. But when I'm editing up this later, I'll probably be like, well, dang it, I should have said this as well. But maybe in the future, I'll kind of add on to this once I release a few more patterns. But for now, that is all. I'm really happy with all of the things that I've learned. I'm glad I went through the experience of releasing a pattern and learning from the experience. I'm glad that I learned as much as I did. I learned a lot, and I even have a little place in my notebook. I have a little notebook where I can jot down what I do for patterns as I'm writing them up, so that when I go to write up the pattern, I have numbers and stuff. I keep it all in my notebook, and at the very front of that notebook, I have a little spot that says what I would do differently next time. And I have a little list of, a long list of all of the things that I would do differently next time that I'm running a test knit or designing a pattern or knitting something up from scratch, or, you know, self-drafting a pattern or writing a pattern or grading a pattern. So I'm really glad to be able to document this and share it with all of you. I hope you all have learned something from this and that you can use it to your own benefit, whether you're releasing patterns or dyeing yarn for patterns or dyeing yarn in general, or wanting to get into the world of designing patterns, or even if you're just a knitter and you've learned a little bit about what it takes to release a pattern, and you can better appreciate the value of patterns and, you know, appreciate how much work goes into them. And with that, I will thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if any of the things that I learned resonate with you. If you've learned anything from this video, and let me know if you're about to release any patterns of your own so we can go check it out and support them. Yeah, let's just chat in the comments. That's always a lot of fun. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for being here. And if you've been here for a long time, thanks for being here. I really, really appreciate every single one of you. If you like this video, again, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you are notified anytime I release a new video. That's all for now. Thanks, everyone. Bye.